Please comment where you are watching in the world. I matched with Sam on a Tuesday night. I couldn't sleep. His profile was neat, understated. A couple photos, hiking trail, dinner with friends, one of him holding a dog he claimed wasn't his. His bio read, "Nice guy. Steady job. Loyal to a fault. Let's keep it real." We started chatting. He was quick with replies. Friendly. A little too smooth, but nothing alarming. We talked about bad movies, our worst travel stories, and the fact that we'd both grown up in small towns. After a few days of messaging, I agreed to meet him for drinks. Public spot, early evening, low risk. The date was fine. Not awkward, but not effortless either. He asked a lot of questions, most of them rapid fire, like he had a checklist to complete before last call. Where did I work? What was my relationship like with my parents? Did I live alone? Did I use my real name on social media? That last one made me pause. Just curious, he said, smiling. Something about it made my skin itch. I answered vaguely. Changed the subject. By the end of the night, I knew I wouldn't see him again. He was pleasant, but not someone I saw myself building anything with. There was something too curated about him, too rehearsed. The next day I texted, "Hey Sam, I wanted to thank you again for last night. I just didn't feel the right connection. Wishing you the best, though." No reply. I didn't think twice. Rejection is part of dating. Most people get it. Then the whispers started. A week later, a colleague pulled me aside at work. "Hey," she said awkwardly. "Not to be weird, but have you been telling people you and Sam hooked up?" I stared at her. "What? No. Why would I?" She hesitated. "Because he's been saying you did, and that you ghosted him after." My heart sank. I hadn't told anyone about the date. Not even close friends. "He's talking to people here?" I asked. She nodded, eyes cautious. "He came by the cafe next door. Talked to Jeff from IT. It's been floating around." I felt nauseous. I messaged him. "Why are you telling people lies about me?" He replied, "Relax. I'm just telling my side of the story." My side of the story. Like there were two truths to what happened. I blocked his number. But blocking him didn't stop it. It just made him quieter. He didn't text again, but over the next few weeks, people I barely knew started looking at me differently. Stiff smiles. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. A strange tension I couldn't name. I heard he was telling people I used him for attention. That I played the mental health card when I rejected him. That I was known for ghosting guys after getting what I wanted. We had one date. One drink. No kiss. But that didn't matter. The lie was more interesting than the truth. I went to HR. They sympathized. Said they couldn't do much. He wasn't technically an employee. Just someone with a long list of mutuals. They advised me to avoid contact and let it pass. As if this were weather. As if I hadn't already lost something. The ease of walking into my workplace without flinching. The comfort of being believed by default. He messaged one of my friends. Told her he was worried about me. That I was spiraling. That maybe she should keep an eye on me. She blocked him immediately. But the damage was done. I started double-checking my privacy settings. Turned off location on everything. Changed usernames. Looked over my shoulder at coffee shops. My anxiety, which had been mostly manageable for years, flared like a match to gasoline. I barely slept. My appetite dropped. I was waiting for something to happen that already had, over and over. He hadn't hurt me physically, but he made me invisible in my own life. Months passed. The rumors faded. People forgot, or pretended to. I got a new job in a different office. Moved apartments. Changed coffee shops. Learned to breathe again. But even now, sometimes when I meet someone new, someone nice, someone curious, and they ask where I work, or what my socials are, or if I live alone, I hesitate. Not because they're bad people, but because I remember how fast a small no can turn into a long story you didn't write. Because not all men scream. Some whisper lies loud enough for a crowd, and watch you unravel. Quietly. When I matched with Elena, I thought, she's too soft for me. Not weak, just gentle. Her pictures were warm, muted. Reading a book by the window, laughing with her hair in her face. Her profile said, trying to live slower. Good coffee, loud honesty, and novels with sad endings. It was the loud honesty that got me. I messaged her first. She replied within minutes. We fell into rhythm fast. Texts in the morning, long audio messages at night. She didn't talk much about work. She asked a lot about my childhood, my fears, the things that made me want to stay in bed on Sundays. She always responded like she was stitching each word into memory. I just like knowing what shaped people, she said. When we met in person, it was quiet magic. Not fireworks. Not heat. Just ease. I didn't feel the need to perform around her. I didn't reach for jokes or metaphors. I just existed. And she saw me. By our third date, I was smitten. She told me she was a virgin on our fourth. We were sitting in my car after dinner, music low, watching people walk out of a movie theater across the street. She said it calmly. No big preamble. I've never slept with anyone. I turned to look at her. Okay. I mean, like never. I smiled. I got that. She laughed, a little nervously. You're not weirded out? Why would I be? She shrugged. Most people are. I'm not most people. That was the night we kissed for real. It was slow, careful, like she was giving me a gift wrapped in 100 small, nervous glances. After that, I was gentle. I didn't push. I didn't ask. She'd touched something inside me, the part that craved emotional weight more than physical speed. We'd lie on the couch and read. She'd rest her head on my chest and ask questions like, do you think people are capable of changing their deepest patterns? Or, what's something about you nobody gets, even when you try to explain? She said she loved how I made space for her. She said I made her feel real. I believed her. It happened 2 months in. We were curled up under a blanket, the lights low. I thought we were about to fall asleep, but then she sat up, eyes wide, jaw tight. I lied, she said. My chest tightened. About what? She pulled the blanket to her chin. About being a virgin. I blinked. Okay. I'm not. I haven't been for a long time. I just didn't want you to know who I really was. I sat up slowly. Why? She looked down. Because if I told you the truth, you'd see me differently. Truth like, you had a lot of partners? Or, she cut me off. Truth like I used to be someone else. Someone Messier. Someone who made a lot of choices out of pain. And I didn't want you to love that version. I didn't speak. I could feel her unraveling in front of me, not trying to manipulate, just trying to survive the weight of her own words. I thought if I could be new with you, she whispered. I could be different. I could be clean. Start over. I reached for her hand. You don't need to be clean for me, I said. She shook her head. You don't understand. There are parts of me I buried so deep, I thought lying was easier than bringing them back to the surface. She told me stories. About the relationships that weren't really relationships. About the years she spent drinking too much and pretending she was in control. About the version of her that she thought couldn't be loved unless she was rewritten. I listened. Quietly. Then I asked the only question I could. Do you still feel like her? She looked at me. Sometimes. We stayed together for a few more weeks. It wasn't the lie that broke us. It was what came after, the space that grew between us once the illusion cracked. She didn't lie again, but she didn't open up either. It was like she'd shown me too much, and now she didn't know how to stand in front of me without armor. I tried to hold space. I tried to wait. But some truths can't be unspoken. And some versions of ourselves aren't ready to be loved, even when someone tries. The last time I saw her, we sat in silence for nearly an hour. Then she said, I think I wanted you to fix something in me. You're not broken, I said. I know, she replied. But it felt better to believe I could be. She kissed me once. Soft. Grateful. And then she left. We haven't spoken since. Sometimes I think about the girl on my couch, telling me who she wasn't before she could admit who she was. And I wonder, if she'd told the truth from the start, would I have loved her more? Or would I have left sooner? I don't know. It started with a game. Bryce and I met on a Discord server for indie games, of all places. He DM'd me after I posted about loving narrative-heavy RPGs. His message was simple. Okay, but do you actually love them, or do you say that to intimidate casual gamers? I laughed. Typed back. Test me. We started gaming together that night. At first, it was low stakes. Casual matches, late-night chats, shared playlists in the background. He had a good voice for voice chat, low and smooth, with this dry, sarcastic delivery that made everything sound effortless. He wasn't flirty at first. Just fun. Competitive in a harmless way. We joked. We trash-talked. I started to look forward to hearing his voice when I logged on. After a week, he asked for my number. I don't usually meet people this way, he said. But I like playing with you. You're different. I liked the way he said that. Like I mattered. 2 weeks later, we set up a date. Nothing fancy. Just hanging at my place, pizza, drinks, a new co-op game we were both excited to try. I figured if we could get along virtually, it'd be fun in person too. He showed up in a hoodie and jeans, carrying his own controller like a gentleman. In person, he looked the same as his profile pics, maybe a little taller, a little broader. His smile was real. We settled in, played, ate, laughed, and then something small happened. I missed a quick-time event in the game, a stupid split-second button tap, and we lost a round. I laughed. Whoops. My bad. He didn't laugh. He exhaled hard. You had one thing to do. I thought he was joking. Chill, it's a game. He didn't reply. Just restarted the level. That was the first crack. The night kept going. We won a few rounds. Lost one. He started criticizing, not playful jabs, but snide little remarks. You always do that. God, why are you still trying to melee? Maybe if you paid attention. At one point, I paused the game and looked at him. Dude, are you okay? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm fine. Just focused. Then came the moment I can't forget. Another round. High stakes. We were doing great, until I slipped up, misjudging a jump, which caused us to fail a boss sequence. It was silent for a second. Then, without a word, he stood up, fast, grabbed his phone off the coffee table, and hurled it across the room. It hit the wall behind my monitor with a crack, bounced off, and shattered my speaker setup. I jumped off the couch. What the hell? He didn't yell. He didn't apologize. He just stared at the broken pieces like they were something I made happen. His voice was quiet. You never listen. I backed up toward the door. This is over, I said. He scoffed. Over? What even is this? You're just like everyone else, can't take intensity. You broke my stuff, I snapped. It's a phone. No, my stuff. My speakers, Bryce. My apartment. My space. His face shifted. He wasn't angry now. He looked smug. You're overreacting. I didn't answer. Just pointed to the door. Leave. He stared for a beat, then grabbed his controller bag and stormed out without another word. I locked the door behind him. And then I sat on the floor, shaking, surrounded by broken plastic. He texted the next day. Sorry. I had a bad week. Shouldn't have brought it into your space. I didn't reply. He texted again. You're seriously gonna ghost me after one bad night? Then came the guilt trip. I guess you're not as cool as I thought. Enjoy playing with losers who don't push you. You'll never be good if you can't take criticism. I blocked him. I replaced the speakers. I kept gaming. But I played solo for a long time after that. Not because I was afraid of other people, but because I had to remind myself of something Bryce made me forget. A person can sound kind, seem calm, and talk about shared interests, and still have rage waiting just under the surface. And it doesn't take much for it to show. Sometimes just one missed button. I met Louisa on a Wednesday. She had a chaotic, sunlit energy, one of those people whose messages feel like dandelions. Light, fast, gone before you really process what was said. Her bio read, professional overthinker, burrito enthusiast, can quote entire episodes of Fleabag at inappropriate times. We clicked fast. Within days we were swapping unhinged stories, sending photos of our breakfast burritos, and planning a casual date at a quiet cafe downtown. I wasn't nervous. Louisa had the vibe of someone who didn't expect fireworks, just honesty, and a decent cappuccino. The cafe was small, cozy, tucked on the corner of a quiet block. I got there 10 minutes early and grabbed a window seat. It was one of those places that plays vinyl too softly and smells like warm almond croissants. When she walked in, I knew it was her immediately. Same messy bun from her photos. Same oversized green coat. A bit shorter than I imagined, but with the same presence, like her brain was sprinting a few steps ahead of her body. Hey, she said, beaming. She moved toward me fast. And that's when it happened. I'm not even sure what caused it, maybe the rug, maybe a misstep, but her foot caught on something, and her body lurched forward. She reached for the chair, missed, and hit the edge of the table. Hard. The sound was sickening. A dull thunk, bone against wood, followed by the sharp gasp of every person in the cafe freezing mid-sip. Then silence. Louisa was on the floor. Her eyes were closed. One arm splayed under her like a doll. A thin line of blood was running from her temple. I didn't move at first. I couldn't. My brain was yelling go, help her, but my body was locked. The world felt sticky and tilted. Then someone screamed. A barista rushed over. A woman near the door was already dialing 911. I dropped to my knees beside Louisa. "Hey, Louisa, can you hear me?" She didn't respond. Her breathing was shallow, and I felt completely useless. The paramedics came fast. They stabilized her neck, checked her vitals, asked me if I was family. I wasn't. I was barely a date. They loaded her into the ambulance and drove off in a blur of red and white. And then it was just me, sitting on a cafe floor, next to a spilled latte and a bag she never got to open. I stayed behind. I told the staff what I knew. I gave them my number in case the hospital needed a witness. They offered me a croissant I didn't want. One of them kept whispering, "That was crazy. That was so crazy." I left in a daze. That night, I stared at my phone for hours. No texts. No updates. I didn't know who to call. I didn't know if I should call. Was I part of this? A stranger? A witness? A maybe date? Her profile was still active. Her last message to me was, "Can't wait for you to see how much foam I demand on my lattes, lol." I read it 6 times. It felt like something left behind, like a voicemail from someone who no longer existed in the same way. The hospital finally called the next afternoon. A nurse. Kind voice. Professional. "She's stable," she said. "Mild concussion. A few stitches. No permanent damage." I exhaled so hard I almost dropped the phone. "She asked that we let you know." Pause. "She also said she's a little embarrassed." I laughed out loud, out of pure relief. The nurse chuckled. "She's fine. Resting. Should be discharged tomorrow." I texted Louisa that evening. "I don't usually cause this much chaos on a first date. Hope you're okay. Sending you a virtual croissant." She replied a few hours later. "I swear I'm not usually a Final Destination prequel. Thanks for being there. Also, I hate virtual croissants. Bring me a real one next time." Next time. We never went on a second date. We messaged for a while, but something had shifted. She got busy. I pulled back. The momentum just faded, like we'd fast-forwarded through something too intense, too soon, and couldn't rewind. But I still think about her, about how fast things can change, about how you can show up for something small, coffee, a name, a moment, and leave carrying something you'll never quite put down. Because some dates don't turn into relationships. Some just become stories you tell carefully, like glass. I matched with Miles because his profile felt familiar. Not in a déjà vu way, more like someone took pieces of my personality and rearranged them into a different face. His favorite books list? Identical to mine. His travel photos? All places I'd pinned on Google Maps. His music taste? Obscure, eerily specific. His bio read, INFJ, recovering perfectionist, into long walks and long silences, looking for something rare. I laughed when I read it. It sounded like something I would have written if I were trying to sound deep. I swiped right anyway. We matched instantly. Talking to him was effortless. He didn't just understand my references, he finished them. He quoted my favorite movies before I could bring them up. He used turns of phrase I'd used in my Instagram captions. I told myself it was coincidence. Compatibility. Maybe we'd just read the same books, lived online long enough to absorb the same language. But sometimes it felt like I was messaging myself. On our first date, I brought it up. We were sitting on a bench overlooking the city, sharing coffee from a local cart. "You remind me of me," I said. He grinned. "You remind me of me too." It was charming. Disarming. I felt seen. Understood. Like I'd been waiting for someone who got it. The loneliness beneath the sarcasm. The way I carried old wounds like pocket stones. He called it emotional mirroring. Said it meant we were deeply aligned. I believed him. The next few weeks were a blur of intimacy. We stayed up until 3 a.m. talking about childhood trauma. We swapped playlists. We cooked together in silence like we'd done it 100 times. It felt real. Until it didn't. The cracks started small. One night, I sent him a song I'd just discovered, something raw, haunting. He replied instantly. "You showed me that last week." I hadn't. But I second-guessed myself. Then there was the time I told him about a book that changed me, Giovanni's Room, and he said he'd read it years ago. But later, he mispronounced Baldwin's name. Called it Giovanni's House. I laughed it off. But something itched at the back of my brain. The unraveling happened slowly, like someone quietly rewinding a movie. A mutual friend followed him on Instagram, someone I'd met through work. She messaged me later. "Hey, didn't you post that caption last year?" Miles just used the exact same one. I went digging. Scrolled through his feed, his likes, his Twitter replies. And I saw it. Me. Everywhere. Phrases I'd used. Quotes from messages I'd sent him. Jokes I'd made with friends. He'd repurposed them. Posted them as his own. Recycled pieces of me into his digital persona, like scraps in a collage. I confronted him. Why are you copying me? He didn't flinch. Because I admire you, he said. You have a voice I wish I had. You're the most fully formed person I've ever met. That doesn't give you permission to become me, I said. His voice stayed calm. But if becoming more like you makes me better, what's the harm? I felt dizzy. After that, I pulled away. Stopped replying right away. Started noticing every time his words felt too perfect, too rehearsed. When I was angry, he was apologetic. When I was quiet, he was contemplative. When I laughed, he echoed it with the exact same rhythm. It stopped feeling like we were aligned. It started feeling like I was being studied. The final straw came a few weeks later. I was at a small party, someone's rooftop birthday. Miles wasn't there. I was telling a story about my old apartment, about the night the ceiling caved in during a thunderstorm and I had to sleep under a tarp. Halfway through, a girl across the circle interrupted. "Oh my God," she said. "Didn't Miles say he lived through that exact thing?" The room turned. I froze. She laughed, oblivious. "Same apartment, right? Tarp and all." He told that story like it was his. I didn't finish mine. I left early. We never fought. I just disappeared. Blocked him on everything. Changed passwords. Deleted the chat logs. He didn't chase me. Maybe he was too busy becoming someone new. Sometimes I wonder if I ever actually met Miles. Or if I just met a mirror. Polished. Empty. I didn't even think it was a bad date. Nico and I met on Bumble. His profile was full of affirmations and indie boy soft vibes. Therapy is cool. Feminism is mandatory. Here to grow. He had the look, too. Wavy hair. Round glasses. Corduroy jacket over vintage tees. The kind of man who talks about emotional intelligence and says things like, "I just want a safe space to be vulnerable." Our chats were decent. He was charming, kind of over-earnest, but in a way that felt genuine. He asked what books shaped me, if I was more sunrise or moonlight. Stuff like that. We met at a wine bar that had mood lighting and walls full of plants. I showed up in a denim jacket and lipstick I wasn't sure about. He wore a scarf. We hugged hello. Saturday. Ordered drinks. That was the peak of the night. The actual conversation was fine. Just fine. I don't even remember most of it. Something about his startup that made educational apps. Something about how his ex didn't believe in his growth. And a lot about how he's done the work and not like other men. I nodded. Smiled. Checked my phone once when he went to the bathroom. By the end of the date, I knew there was no romantic pull. He was polite, and I liked his posture on paper. But in person, something didn't click. There was a hollowness to it all. Like he knew the right words, but didn't know how to mean them. When he asked if I wanted to grab food after, I gently declined. Said I was tired. He offered to walk me to my car. I told him I was good. "Totally," he said, smiling. "Thanks for showing up with such good energy." "Of course," I said. I got in my car and drove away. I didn't text him after that. 2 days later, he texted me. "Hey, had a great time. Would love to see you again soon, smiley face." I replied, "Hey Nico, thank you again for the night, but I didn't feel a spark. Wishing you the best though." No response. I assumed that was that. It was not. 3 days after that, I got a DM from a girl I didn't know. "Hey, I know this is random, but I just saw a TikTok I think might be about you." She sent the link. I clicked it. It was Nico, lit by string lights, wearing the same scarf, looking devastated. "Story time," he said, sighing like a sad indie song was playing in the background. So I went on this date with this girl. Thought it was magic. Thought I'd found someone who got it. She talked about safe spaces, trust, books. All of it. The camera zoomed slightly. And then, just like that, ghosted. Like I didn't matter at all. I blinked. He went on. "It's crazy how some people perform connection just to get attention. Like they collect moments to feed their ego. You open up, and they use it for content. I just feel like we need to talk about how some women treat vulnerability like a game." No names. No identifying details. But I knew. It was me. The video had 86,000 views. People in the comments were furious. "She sounds like a narcissist. Men can't even express feelings without being punished. You deserve better, King." I scrolled, and scrolled, and scrolled. I messaged him. Are you serious? That video? You're painting me as some manipulative monster because I didn't want a second date. He replied an hour later. I didn't name you. It's just my truth. My truth. Over the next week, 2 more videos went up. He never said my name. But the way he described me, the date, the place, the exact phrases I used, it was unmistakable. He turned our normal, awkward date into a Greek tragedy. In one clip, he fake choked up saying, I guess I just thought I deserved a little more honesty. As if I'd seduced him with poetry and vanished like smoke. The irony? I had been honest. That was the whole problem. I hadn't lied, led him on, or disappeared. I'd said the thing no man like Nico actually wants to hear. You're nice. But no, thank you. People started tagging me. A mutual follower made a comment. Isn't this about that designer girl he went out with last week? I felt the shift. Suddenly my inbox filled with messages, some supportive, others vile. This you? You broke a good guy. Hope the likes were worth it. Wow. You women say you want soft men, and then you humiliate them. That one stuck. Because I hadn't humiliated him. I declined him. Which, to a man like Nico, was the same thing. I didn't fight back. I didn't post a counter video. I didn't share screenshots of our texts or dissect his manipulation. I knew how it would look. She's defensive. She's bitter. She's proving his point. That's the genius of the good guy persona. It's not about actually being good. It's about curating perceived goodness so tightly that any rejection feels like a moral injustice. A betrayal of the narrative. Because if he's the soft-spoken, emotionally intelligent feminist king, then I must be the villain. Weeks passed. He posted a video where he burned a copy of the bell jar saying, Some of you pretend to read this, but don't actually understand pain. I laughed out loud. Couldn't help it. He was spiraling into performance art. But still the comments came. Still the DMs came. And the worst part, some people believed him. Not because of proof, but because he looked like the kind of man who tells the truth. Now months later, it's faded. He's posting about a new heartbreak, some other girl who didn't fall for the curated softness. I guess I was just chapter 3 in his memoir. But I still think about it. How fragile men don't break like glass, they sharpen like knives. And when you say no, they don't always yell. Sometimes they whisper. And let the world do the rest. When I matched with Eli, he seemed normal. Too normal, maybe. Clean photos. A goofy grin. Bio said, guitar player, decent cook, aspiring dog owner. Looking for something real. We talked for a week before meeting up. Eli was a little corny, a little shy, but funny in that self-deprecating way some guys use like a shield. We traded playlists, swapped memes, and once had an entire midnight conversation about weird dreams. He wasn't magnetic, but he was solid. And after my last few chaotic experiences, solid sounded nice. We agreed to meet for a drink at a bar downtown. Public. Safe. The night of the date, I wore a loose sweater and jeans. Comfortable, nonchalant. I didn't expect fireworks. Just maybe someone to share a drink and some decent conversation with. Eli was already at the bar when I arrived, perched on a high stool, sipping something clear. He stood when he saw me, offered a tight smile, and said, You look exactly like your pictures. I laughed. That's reassuring? We sat, ordered drinks. I asked for a gin and tonic. He got the same. He told me about his job in app development, and I nodded through a slightly too detailed explanation of his latest project. There was something a little twitchy in his energy, like he was trying to act more casual than he felt. Still, I've been on worse dates. He talked a lot, but he was kind. I smiled. I even let myself relax a little, until I noticed his eyes flick toward my drink. Not once. Not twice. Constantly. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I kept sipping as we talked, but every time I looked down, he looked with me. Like he was tracking it. Then I caught it. His hand. A subtle flick of the wrist. He was adjusting something by his glass. Or maybe by mine. It happened fast. So fast I almost doubted myself. A small foil packet. The tiniest crinkle of sound. My stomach dropped. I didn't touch my glass again. The air shifted. It was the strangest thing, how my whole body suddenly felt alert. Like every inch of skin had grown eyes. I kept the conversation going, but a part of me was detaching, zooming out, watching everything from above. I needed to get away. But if I bolted, he might follow. If I panicked, he'd know I'd noticed. So I smiled, nodded, and said I needed the restroom. He stood to let me pass. Too quickly. As I walked away, I felt his eyes on my back. Burning. The second I was around the corner, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. There was a message from Harper, my best friend. She'd texted me earlier that day jokingly. Send me a pic of this guy in case he's a serial killer. Smiling face with horns. I hadn't responded. Now I texted. I think something's wrong. I need help. She replied instantly. Where are you? I told her the name of the bar. She didn't ask questions. Leaving now. 10 minutes. I could have cried. Back at the table, Eli was still seated. My drink was untouched. I sat back down, forcing a smile. Sorry. Line was long. No worries, he said. You okay? Yeah. Just got a bit of a headache. He nodded. Want me to grab you some water? No, I'm okay. I actually might need to head out soon. He paused. Something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance? Panic? Oh, he said. Already? I gave a sheepish shrug. Early morning. You know. He looked at my drink again. You didn't finish. I smiled. Not feeling it tonight. Then, and I'll never forget this, he leaned in, lowered his voice, and said, You seemed really into it before. My blood froze. He was too aware of how much I'd had. Too invested. I gave a light laugh, grabbed my purse, and stood. I'll text you. He stood too. I can walk you to your car. No need, I said quickly. Friends picking me up. He tilted his head. Last minute plan? I met his gaze. Yeah. Lucky me. He didn't move. I turned and walked toward the entrance, pulse thudding in my ears. I didn't look back. Harper was already there, parked outside in her dented silver Prius. I yanked open the door and slid in, heart pounding. Drive, I whispered. Now. We drove in silence for a few minutes before I exhaled. Jesus, Harper said. What the hell happened? I told her. Every detail. By the end of it, her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. You think he drugged it? I don't know, I said. But I wasn't sticking around to find out. Later that night, I reported it to the bar manager. They checked the cameras. The footage wasn't perfectly clear, but there was one frame, just one, where Eli's hand hovered over my drink, his fingers curled around something shiny and small. They banned him. Said they'd file a report. I never heard from him again. But for weeks after, I kept thinking, what if I hadn't looked down at the right moment? What if Harper hadn't texted? What if I'd finished that drink? It haunted me, not just the moment, but how close it had come to being another story no one believed. And even now, I still remember the look in his eyes when I said I wasn't drinking anymore. Like he'd just lost something. Like a plan had been ruined. The hardest part wasn't escaping. It was knowing that to the outside world, he would still look like a safe option. Still have that smile. Still hold a door open and say thanks for your time. Because predators don't always growl. Let me just say up front, I didn't think I was signing up for a front row seat to a feminist protest when I asked Lexi out for dinner. She seemed cool, smart, a little eccentric, sure. Her profile said things like anti-capitalist mermaid spiral shell, and her Spotify was 90% flute-based indie folk, but I figured that was just online performance. Who isn't a little weird on the apps? Plus, she was hot. Like Instagram model who pretends she lives in a treehouse hot. So when she said yes to dinner at Maison Vivien, this fancy little French place with candlelight and waiters who speak in hushed tones, I thought I'd scored. Mistake number one. I got to the restaurant early. I'd even made a reservation, shaved, and wore actual shoes that weren't sneakers, a rare effort. I was feeling good. Nervous but good. And then I saw her. Lexi. Walking toward me in what can only be described as a bikini top, sheer mesh cover-up, and flip-flops. It was like a midsummer night's dream had collided with spring break and given birth to a woman who had never heard of indoor dress codes. She waved like nothing was weird. Hey! Hi! I said, too stunned to stop her from hugging me. Her skin was covered in glitter. I don't know if it was intentional or if she'd rolled through a craft store explosion. You look. I searched for a diplomatic word. Warm, I settled on. Like summer. She beamed. I just came from hot yoga and didn't feel like changing. Clothes are oppressive anyway. My brain went red flag, red flag, red flag, but my mouth said, cool. Shall we? Mistake number two. Inside the restaurant, everything slowed down. The lighting was soft, the clinking of cutlery polite, the people well-dressed, like they'd each paid $200 to eat an olive on a leaf. Everyone looked up as we entered. Not glanced. Looked. Lexi waltzed through like she was on a runway. We were halfway to our table when the hostess, who I swear aged 10 years in 2 seconds, intercepted us with the strained smile of someone who's seen one too many influencers film TikToks in her establishment. "I'm so sorry," she said. "We have a dress code." Lexi held up a finger. "And I have a body." Silence. "Excuse me," the hostess said. "I have a body," Lexi repeated. "And I'm not ashamed of it. Are you?" The hostess blinked. I tried to intervene. "Hey, it's cool, we can just—" "No," Lexi snapped, turning to face the room. "No. I'm sick of this. Of being told to hide just to eat overpriced lettuce in a dim room." The lettuce was actually frisee, but I didn't think correcting her would help. She turned to the manager now approaching us. "Do men have to cover their nipples here?" The manager opened his mouth, closed it again, then opened it like a fish attempting diplomacy. "Ma'am, we simply ask that guests dress appropriately." Lexi planted her hands on her hips, mesh fluttering dramatically. "Define appropriate." I wanted to crawl into the wine menu and disappear. "Let's just go somewhere else," I whispered, mortified. But Lexi was in full performance mode. "Appropriate," she shouted now, loud enough to turn more heads. "Like ties that feel like nooses? Like high heels that ruin your spine? Appropriate like corsets used to be appropriate? Like suits during heat waves? Who decides what's appropriate?" I could hear someone filming. Of course someone was filming. The manager, now visibly sweating, tried again. "Ma'am, if you'd be willing to step outside." "And oh," she said, loud enough to rattle the cutlery. "Because this is exactly what I wanted to expose. Hypocrisy. Sexism. Body shaming in the age of body positivity." I looked at the ceiling, wondering if I'd somehow accidentally summoned this moment by joking to my roommate earlier. Watch this be a total train wreck. And then Lexi pulled out her phone and started live streaming. "Hey friends," she said, pouting into the camera. "I'm here at Maison Vivien, where they kicked me out for wearing clothes that breathe because my body makes their beef tartare feel threatened." I could feel my soul leaving my body like steam from a broken kettle. The hostess walked away. The manager retreated. And somehow, that made Lexi more powerful. She turned the phone toward me. "This is Ethan. He brought me here not knowing that this place was an oppression cave of dress code fascism. Say hi, Ethan." I smiled weakly. "Hi." She ended the stream. "Okay," she said, brushing imaginary dust off her shoulder. "I've made my point. Let's go." And with that, she turned and walked out. I followed her because I didn't know what else to do. Once we were outside, I took a deep breath, like I'd just escaped a hostage situation. She meanwhile was glowing. "That was electric," she said. "Did you feel it? That shift in the air?" "I felt something," I muttered. "Resistance is beautiful," she added, stretching her arms. "So, you still hungry?" I blinked. "After that?" She laughed. "Please." That was foreplay. I declined. Politely. She tried to convince me to hit a food truck on the beach instead. I told her I had an early meeting. She gave me a long, unreadable look, then shrugged. "Most men are too scared of women who challenge systems. You'll come around eventually." I didn't. She texted me later that night. "You were adorable under pressure. But not everyone is ready for revolution." I never responded. She didn't follow up. 2 days later, I saw a viral TikTok titled "Body Over BRI," one woman's stand against elitist dress codes. It had 2 million views. Guess who was in the background, looking like a stunned waiter? Me. Do I think Lexi is wrong about everything? Not exactly. But would I ever go on a date again without confirming the person understands the concept of shirts? Absolutely not. I didn't expect Caleb to be memorable. He was one of those safe right swipes, clean profile, kind eyes, unremarkable in the best possible way. His bio read, "Archivist of small moments. Good conversation, good coffee, but both is ideal." We started chatting midweek. His texts were thoughtful, well-punctuated, and refreshingly calm. He wasn't trying to impress me, just connect. He asked questions that felt like tiny windows. What did your childhood bedroom look like? And what's something you miss that no longer exists? It was weirdly charming. After 4 days of chatting, he asked me out for drinks. I said yes. We met at a cozy bar near the Arts District, all exposed brick and soft jazz. Caleb was there early, sitting at a booth with a paperback in one hand and a whiskey in the other. He stood when I walked in. Not in a showy way. Just old-fashioned. "Claire," he said, smiling. He was taller than I expected. Corduroy jacket. Hair tucked neatly behind his ears. He looked like someone who'd write letters in pen. The date was fine. No sparks flying, no red flags waving, just a gentle, slow exchange of thoughts and quiet laughs. He talked about his work in digital archives and how he loved preserving things other people discarded. I told him about my design job and my addiction to terrible reality TV. We talked until last call. When he walked me to my car, he didn't try to kiss me, just smiled and said, "Thanks for your time." I remember thinking that was odd, like I'd just interviewed for something I didn't apply for. The next morning, I texted him to say thank you and let him down gently. I had a lovely time, but I didn't feel a romantic connection. "Hope you find someone great." His reply came quickly. "I appreciate your honesty. Take care. Clean. Respectful." I was relieved. I forgot about him within the week. Until 3 weeks later. It started with a weird comment at work. My coworker Drew leaned over during lunch and said, "Didn't know you were into the quiet poet types." I blinked. "What?" He raised his eyebrows. "Caleb? Tall guy? Works in archival stuff?" My stomach tightened. "You know him?" "Yeah," Drew said casually. "We were in the same film club a few years back. He mentioned he went out with you." I froze. "What did he say exactly?" Drew hesitated. "I dunno. That it was intense. That you ghosted him after things got complicated?" I stared at him. "We had one drink. No one ghosted anyone." Drew shrugged, clearly uncomfortable. I mean, I didn't press him, but it didn't sound great. I tried to brush it off. But 2 days later, I got a message on Instagram from a stranger. "Didn't think you were the type to mess with someone's head like that. Cold." Then another. "Saw what you did to Caleb. Hope the clout was worth it." I felt physically sick. I searched his name on Facebook. Public profile. Still carefully curated. His latest post read, "It's exhausting trying to be gentle in a world that rewards cruelty. I'm done being the lesson in someone else's coming-of-age story." Hundreds of likes. Dozens of comments offering comfort. No names. No details. But I knew. It was about me. I messaged him directly. "I don't know what you've been telling people, but it needs to stop. We had one date. I told you honestly that I wasn't feeling a connection. That's not cruelty. That's boundaries." His reply came minutes later. "You haven't lit. People care. I can't control that." My hands shook. "You framed me. You're manipulating people into thinking I hurt you." "I'm sharing my feelings." "That's not manipulation. It's healing." That word. Healing. As if broadcasting a fictional heartbreak for sympathy was some noble act. I stared at the message for a long time before blocking him. But it was too late. Over the next 2 weeks, my world shrank. A friend unfollowed me. Another stopped replying to my texts. I overheard a woman in my yoga class whisper, "That's the girl," when I walked by. I wasn't famous, but I was now someone else's story. A villain with no lines of her own. I posted nothing. Said nothing. But the silence didn't protect me. Because Caleb hadn't needed me to love him. He needed me to reject him, so he could turn it into a parable. A performance of hurt. A curated heartbreak, starring him as the sensitive soul and me as the cold woman who walked away. He never wanted a relationship. He wanted a tragedy. I thought about confronting him in public, posting my own side, screenshotting everything. But the idea exhausted me. It would make me look defensive, petty, crazy, and worst of all, it would make me part of his narrative. Instead, I wrote everything down. The truth. Not to post. Just to remember that it happened. Because gaslighting doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through other people's mouths. Months passed. The noise faded. He found new followers. New vague posts. New subtextual victims. Eventually, someone else became the next sad poem in his rotation. But I never forgot how fast a no turned into a myth. And now, when I meet someone new, I pay attention, not just to how they speak to me, but to how they frame the people who've said no to them. Because sometimes, heartbreak doesn't break people. It builds them a stage. And if you're not careful, they'll drag you into the spotlight, just to watch you burn. I met Asha on Hinge. Her profile was one of those that stopped you mid-scroll. Big, expressive brown eyes, a shy smile, and a tagline that read, "Biryani critic, book hoarder, and accidental plant killer." She was funny in that warm, unpretentious way. We started talking, and within a week, we were messaging like we'd known each other for years. It was refreshing. There were no forced jokes, no posturing. She was sharp, sarcastic, and curious in a way that made conversations feel like explorations. She'd ask the kind of questions that made me pause before answering. Real questions like, what was your biggest insecurity growing up? Or, what do you believe in that you never say out loud? After a few long nights of texting until 2 a.m. and a marathon video call that left both of us grinning and delirious, we decided to meet. Our first date was in a quiet bookstore cafe downtown. She showed up in a hoodie and jeans, holding a paperback of Middlesex, and ordered a lavender latte like she was a regular. It was raining lightly outside, and somehow that made everything feel softer. Closer. By the end of the date, I was hooked. Over the next few weeks, we grew closer. Movie nights, long walks through the city, shared playlists, casual dinners. There was a rhythm to it that felt safe, natural, like we weren't trying too hard to impress each other. We just were. Then one Friday, out of nowhere, she dropped it. "So my parents are visiting from Mumbai next week," she said, casually flipping through a menu while we waited for lunch. "Oh yeah. They're just here for 10 days. That's nice. You gonna show them around?" She hesitated. "Actually, I was thinking maybe you could meet them." I blinked. "Really? I know it's early," she said quickly, "but it's just dinner. Nothing intense. They're super chill." I didn't know how to respond. We'd only been seeing each other for a little over a month. I hadn't even met her roommates yet. Meeting her parents felt big. But then she gave me that look, eyes soft, hopeful. "They just want to see who I'm spending so much time with. You'll charm them. I promise." I laughed nervously and said yes. Worst decision ever. The night of the dinner, I wore a button-down and khakis. Tried to keep it respectful, but not stiff. I stopped by a florist and picked up a bouquet of lilies, figuring it was a safe choice. She texted me the address, a sleek apartment near the harbor. When I arrived, she buzzed me up and met me at the door, barefoot and beautiful in a long green kurta that flowed when she walked. "You look nervous," she whispered, grinning. "I feel like I'm walking into an interview." "You kind of are." Not helping. Inside, the apartment smelled like saffron and roasted spices. Her mother was standing at the kitchen counter arranging dishes with military precision. Her father sat in the living room, scrolling through his phone, glasses perched at the tip of his nose. "Mom, Dad, this is Rishi," she said, gesturing to me. Her mother gave me a once-over. Not hostile, not exactly warm. Her father stood up, gave me a firm handshake. "Rishi, what do you do?" he asked before I'd even sat down. "I'm a product designer," I said. "With a tech firm." "We do. Startup or established?" Startup, but it's growing fast. We just raised. Funding isn't profit," he said, sitting back down. Asha shot me an apologetic look. I smiled, trying to roll with it. Dinner was set up buffet style. Her mom insisted I try everything. "You need to eat properly if you're going to sit with my daughter," she said. I wasn't sure if it was a joke or a warning. We sat down, plates full. I tried to steer the conversation towards safe topics, food, travel, anything neutral. But her dad kept coming back to me. "What are your long-term goals? Do you plan to buy property in the next 5 years? Do your parents live nearby? How much do you save every month?" Each question was more personal than the last. I tried to answer politely, but I could feel the sweat under my collar. Asha stayed mostly quiet, occasionally trying to redirect the conversation. "Dad, can we talk about something else?" But he brushed her off with a wave of his hand. Then her mom chimed in. "What is your caste?" I nearly dropped my spoon. "Excuse me?" "Your background," she clarified. "We don't believe in such things, of course. But it's good to know. For compatibility." I looked at Asha, who looked away. "I don't really practice anything," I said carefully. "We were raised kind of secular." Her mom didn't hide her disapproval. "So no rituals? No temple?" "No, ma'am." She nodded slowly, as if confirming a suspicion. I tried to bring Asha into the conversation, but it was like she was slowly detaching. She looked tense, chewing slowly, eyes flicking between me and her parents. Then her dad said something that broke me. "You seem like a nice enough boy. But nice isn't enough. My daughter needs someone with ambition. Someone who understands the importance of legacy. Not just coffee and apps." Asha gasped. "Dad." He kept going. "I'm not saying this to insult you. I just don't want her wasting time. She's not a child anymore." I put my fork down. "I appreciate your honesty," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "But I wasn't aware tonight was a vetting session." "That's not what this is," Asha said quickly, but her father raised his hand again. "Don't misunderstand. We're just protective. No, I said, standing up. You're invasive. Her mother looked scandalized. Her father narrowed his eyes. Asha looked like she was about to cry. I think I should go. Asha stood too. Wait. I shook my head gently. I like you, Asha. A lot. But I'm not here to audition for your parents. And with that I left. I didn't hear from her that night. The next day she texted me. I'm so sorry. I didn't know they'd be like that. I should have never put you in that position. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me felt for her. I knew she probably grew up with this kind of pressure her whole life. But part of me was also angry that she'd brought me into it without warning. I needed time. She messaged again the next day. I care about you, but I can't change them overnight. I waited a few hours, then replied. I know, but I can't be with someone whose love comes with a panel of judges. We haven't spoken since. A few months later, I saw a photo of her on Instagram, sitting on a beach in Goa, hair tousled by the wind, smiling like someone who had finally exhaled. I hope she's okay. I hope she finds someone who fits her world better, or changes it completely. And as for me, I learned something valuable that night. Never agree to meet someone's parents on the third week, especially if there's homemade painter and passive aggression involved. I matched with Owen on a rainy Tuesday night. His profile wasn't flashy, which I liked. Just a few cozy photos, one of him reading in a sunlit window, one walking his dog, a grumpy-looking beagle named Harold, and one where he was making sourdough. His bio was short and warm. Archivist. Plant dad. Mildly obsessed with old things and bad puns. We started chatting about books, then museums, then antique shops and weird local folklore. He was the kind of person who could talk about ancient Roman plumbing systems and somehow make it charming. After 3 days of texting, he asked if I wanted to meet up for coffee. I said yes. Our first date was at a tucked-away cafe that smelled like cinnamon and jazz. Owen was already there when I arrived, wearing a dark green sweater and glasses that fogged up slightly when he smiled. He stood up to greet me like we were in some classic film. Gentle, polite, soft-spoken. The date was wonderful. He told me about his job at a preservation lab downtown. He worked with old documents and photos, carefully restoring them, scanning them, sometimes even tracing family trees for clients who wanted to understand where they came from. I get to hold history in my hands, he said, eyes lighting up. It's fragile, but it's beautiful. We talked for 2 hours, then took a walk in the misty rain. By the end of the night, I was thinking, this is what people mean when they say old soul. We hugged goodbye. I went home and texted my best friend. I think I just met a Studio Ghibli character in real life. Date 2 came a week later. Owen invited me to his place for dinner. I make a mean mushroom risotto, he said. He lived in a quiet, ivy-covered brick building that smelled like warm wood and dust. Inside, it looked exactly how I expected. Shelves of vintage books, old maps in frames, dried flowers hanging upside down near the windows. There was even a typewriter on the side table. It was like stepping into the past, and I loved it. Dinner was perfect. He lit candles. He played some instrumental vinyl record that I couldn't name, but wanted to. The risotto was delicious. Afterward, we sat on his couch with mugs of tea, the silence between us comfortable. That's when he asked, "Want to see my work?" "Your work?" He grinned. "Sort of. My passion project. It's unusual, but I think you'll appreciate it." I followed him down the hallway to a door I hadn't noticed before. He pulled out a small key from his pocket and unlocked it. Inside was a dimly lit room, more of a den really, filled with shelves, drawers, and glass cases. At first, I thought it was a collection of old scientific equipment. There were labeled jars, handwritten notebooks, and glass vials arranged in neat rows. On one shelf, I saw preserved flower petals, pressed flat between panes of glass. On another, old coins and fragments of letters. "This is amazing," I said, genuinely fascinated. He smiled, but his expression changed, a flicker of hesitation, like he wasn't sure whether to keep going. "I preserve traces," he said slowly. "Traces?" He walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a small glass bottle, about the size of a test tube. Inside it was a yellowish, cloudy liquid. I blinked. My smile faltered. "That," he said, holding it up to the light, "is from the week I got my job offer at the lab. August 2018. I didn't speak. He set it down and picked up another. "This one's from my grandfather's funeral. I was dehydrated. The color was almost amber. Wild, right?" My throat dried. "Wait," I said. "Is that your—" Urine, he finished. Yes. There was no shame in his voice. No embarrassment. He was calm. Academic. Like he was explaining the weather. I tried to laugh. You're kidding. He smiled faintly. No. I know it's not exactly mainstream. But I think there's something poetic about preserving what we usually throw away. Our bodies tell stories. We ignore them. I took a half step back. I don't keep everything, he added quickly, seeing my face. Just moments. Times when something shifted. A ritual of sorts. I was silent. You're the first person I've shown this to, he said. It's important to me. But if it freaks you out, I understand. And that's when I realized something important. He wasn't trying to be weird. He wasn't showing off. He was sincere. That made it worse. I felt trapped, not by him, but by the kindness that had preceded this. The laughter, the risotto, the thoughtful conversation. How could someone so normal, so gentle, do something so bizarre? I think I need a minute, I said. He nodded. Of course. I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. Leaning against the wall, I stared at a framed photograph of an old tree, leaves blurred in the wind. My heart was racing. I felt guilty, like I was overreacting, but also couldn't shake the visceral discomfort in my gut. He collected his urine. Labeled it. Dated it. Displayed it. I wasn't sure I could come back from that. When I returned to the living room, Owen was putting away the teacups. Do you want to go? He asked gently. I nodded. Yeah, I think I need some time. He walked me to the door. No hard feelings. No pressure. Just that same sad smile. I get it, he said. Most people don't. I gave him a quick hug, and he didn't try to make it more. On the ride home, my mind spiraled. Was I being judgmental? Was this one of those things where societal norms were keeping me from appreciating someone's uniqueness? Or was it just objectively too much? I told my friend Kendra about it. She spit out her drink. He collects. What? I tried to explain. Tried to defend him even. But deep down, I knew the truth. Some quirks weren't just quirks. Some were signs of deeper incompatibilities. Worldviews too far apart to meet in the middle. I never reached out again. He didn't either. A few weeks later, I saw him in a photo online. Someone had tagged him at a local museum event. He looked the same. Glasses, sweater, soft smile. And I wondered if he'd shown anyone else that room since. Maybe he had. Maybe someone found it beautiful. But it wasn't me. And that's okay. Because love, like preservation, isn't just about collecting things. It's about knowing what you can live with. I'll be honest, when I first matched with Maren on a dating app called Finch, I wasn't expecting anything major. Her profile was simple. A few soft-lit photos of her with an old camera, a golden retriever, and one of her sitting barefoot on a dock with a sunset behind her. Her bio said something like, lover of old jazz records, road trips, and strong coffee. It was the kind of profile that was aesthetically pleasing, but vague enough to feel distant. Still, something about her smile pulled me in. I messaged first. Okay, but how strong is the coffee? She replied within minutes. Strong enough to take down the patriarchy. I laughed. That was our beginning. We started chatting almost daily. At first, it was light, music tastes. She liked Nina Simone and Bon Iver. Books, she'd read The Bell Jar 5 times. Favorite cities, she was obsessed with Portland. Then came the heavier stuff. Family, dreams, things we were afraid to admit to ourselves. Maren was different from most people I'd met online. She wasn't just tossing me TikToks or quoting one-liners. She asked thoughtful questions and listened like it mattered. Our conversations were easy but meaningful, and within a week, I found myself looking forward to her messages the way a kid looks forward to summer vacation. There was one night in particular. We'd both had crappy days, and we ended up on the phone for over 4 hours. Somewhere between talking about our childhoods and whether ghosts were real, she said something that stuck with me. There's something about me you might not be ready for, she said, her voice a little shaky. What do you mean? I have a part of my story that I usually don't share early on. I could feel my stomach tighten, not out of fear but curiosity. You don't have to tell me anything before you're ready, I said, trying to sound as calm as I felt nervous. I'm here. That's all. She let out a soft laugh. I'll tell you soon. Just give me a little time. I didn't push her. We kept talking. More late-night calls, more confessions, more falling into each other in that slow, careful way that sometimes feels more real than anything. When we finally decided to meet in person, it was for coffee at this tucked-away place called Nomad's Nook. I got there first, fidgeting with my phone until I saw her walk in. She looked exactly like her photos, but more alive. Her hair was tied up in a messy knot, strands falling into her eyes, and she wore this oversized corduroy jacket with patches sewn into the sleeves. When she smiled at me, I swear the noise of the cafe faded out. The first date was a dream. She laughed in real time, not just over text. She listened with her eyes, not just her ears. We talked until they closed the place down, then walked the long way back to her car. There was a moment when we stood by the sidewalk, the air crisp and filled with the sound of distant city life, and I thought, this could be something. We had 3 more dates in the next 2 weeks. A bookstore afternoon, a wine bar night, and a hike along the lake where she insisted we stop every 5 minutes so she could photograph moments. I let her. I loved watching her work. There was a softness to her, but she wasn't fragile, more like wild silk. Strong but unafraid to feel. It was on our 5th date, over dinner at this ambient, dimly lit Thai place, that things shifted. She'd been quiet all night. Still sweet, still warm, but I could feel her holding something in. Between bites of pad CEW, she looked at me, not blinking. I think I'm ready to tell you. I froze slightly. Not in fear, just readiness. Okay, I said. I'm listening. She paused, running her fingers along the edge of her water glass. Then, I'm intersex. The room didn't tilt. The floor didn't disappear. But my mind stalled for a beat, like a page halfway turned. I didn't know what I'd expected, but it wasn't that. She kept speaking, probably to fill the silence. I was born with ambiguous genitalia. My parents chose to have me undergo surgery as a baby to assign me female. I didn't know any of this until I was a teenager. I had surgeries I didn't remember, and hormone therapy that made me feel disconnected from myself. It's been a long process. I've come to terms with it, but I've had people leave when I tell them. So I usually wait until I trust someone. I nodded slowly, trying to keep my expression neutral. I wasn't repulsed. I wasn't angry. But I was overwhelmed. Not by what she said, but by the responsibility I suddenly felt to react right. To not be another disappointment to her. Thank you, I said finally, for trusting me. She smiled, but it was small and unsure. You can ask me anything if you want to. I had a million questions. Some medical, some personal, some I was ashamed of for even thinking. But all I said was, "Are you okay now?" She nodded. Yeah, mostly. It's a part of me, but it doesn't define me. I just didn't want to start something with someone under a lie. You deserve to know the truth. I reached across the table, touched her hand. She held it like it was something fragile, like she was giving me a chance to choose again. The rest of the night was quiet. Conversation returned, but slower. I think we were both processing in our own ways. When I dropped her off, she didn't kiss me. Just gave me that soft, unreadable smile and said, "Good night." I didn't sleep well that night. Not because of her. Because of me. I kept wondering, why did this throw me so much? She was still Marin. Still the woman who quoted James Baldwin and cried during nature documentaries. Still the woman who remembered my coffee order and texted me good night with a star emoji. But I realized how little I truly knew about the experiences people live with. How easy it is to think you're open-minded until life tests you. Over the next few days, we texted, but things had shifted. She could feel it. I could feel it. I wanted to be the guy who said this doesn't matter at all. But part of me knew I needed to understand more than I currently did. I confided in my best friend, Cam. She's great. I still like her. I just didn't expect that. He nodded slowly. You don't have to make a decision tonight, man. But be honest with yourself. If you care about her, be willing to learn. If you can't handle it, let her go with kindness. I thought about that for days. Eventually, I asked Marin if we could talk in person. We met at the same coffee shop where we'd had our first date. She looked nervous. I just want to start by saying, I told her, I still think you're amazing, but I've been doing some thinking. She didn't speak. Just nodded. I don't know if I'm ready for the depth of what your life has been. Not because I don't respect you, but because I don't want to pretend I'm equipped to support you through the things I don't understand yet. She blinked a few times and then looked down. You don't owe me anything, she said, but I do appreciate you not ghosting. I smiled sadly. That's the bare minimum. You deserve so much more than that. We hugged outside. A real hug. One of those hugs you give someone who changed your life even if they don't stay in it. She whispered thank you into my shoulder, and I whispered, I'm sorry, into her hair. I never saw Marin again after that. Not in person, anyway. I met Theo on Bumble on a Tuesday night after a particularly rough day at work. My boss had micromanaged me into oblivion. I'd spilled coffee on my white blouse, and my roommate's cat had peed on my shoes again. So when Theo's profile popped up, clean-cut, dimpled smile, confidently holding a cup of espresso in a well-lit, urban cafe, it felt like the universe was offering a tiny peace offering. His profile was sharp. He was an art director for a high-end fashion house in the city, rode motorcycles on weekends, and claimed to be a well-dressed softy who believes in style, substance, and good sushi. I liked that combo, confident but not arrogant, ambitious but seemingly chill. I swiped right. We matched almost instantly. His first message was simple. Okay, important question. Do you judge a man for owning more skincare products than you? I laughed and replied, only if he won't share them. That kicked it off. We messaged throughout the week. Theo was witty, articulate, and refreshingly honest. He sent voice notes instead of just texting, and they made me smile every time. He had one of those voices that made you picture someone leaning against a doorway, half amused, like he was always in on some secret. I was intrigued. We talked about everything from our love-hate relationships with our jobs to childhood obsessions. His was Lego architecture, mine was animating Barbie dramas on PowerPoint. He dropped obscure movie references, and I kept up. He seemed impressed. After 4 days, he asked to meet in person. We agreed on brunch that Sunday at this place called Cypress and Cedar. One of those trendy spots with minimalist decor, Edison bulbs, and avocado toast that cost as much as a tank of gas. I'd been once before with a friend, and remembered how everyone there looked like they'd just stepped out of a lifestyle blog. I wore jeans, a mustard yellow sweater, and minimal makeup. I didn't think much of it. I liked being casual on first dates, felt more real that way. When I arrived, Theo was already seated outside on the patio. He stood up as I approached, and I admit, the man was put together. Slim-fit slacks, a tailored navy trench, Chelsea boots that looked straight off a runway, and a watch I was almost certain cost more than my rent. He looked like the kind of man you see in a GQ spread. Effortlessly cool. I suddenly felt like a walking before picture. But he smiled, and all that melted away, at least for the moment. Hey you, he said, pulling out my chair. We talked for over an hour. The banter was good. He was funny, kind of dramatic in a charming way, and asked interesting questions. But slowly, I started to notice something off. It started when he complimented my earrings, small gold hoops I'd gotten from a street vendor on a trip to Lisbon. These are cute, he said, running a finger along one of them. Where are they from? Lisbon, I said. Little street market. €5, I think. He blinked. Oh, then laughed, like it was cute but pitiful. Later, I complimented his coat, and he immediately launched into a monologue about the designer, the limited run, and how much people underestimate investment pieces. I mean, why wear Zara when you can wear history, he said. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just smiled and sipped my overpriced matcha. He started dropping names. Designers I'd never heard of. Restaurants I couldn't afford. He spoke in brand language, not just what he wore, but what car he wanted, what wine label he respected, which furniture stores were beneath him. I laughed nervously once and said, you know, I'm more of a thrift store and DIY kind of girl. He smiled, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. A tightening. Ha, he said. That's cute. Like artsy quirky, right? I nodded slowly. Sure. Then he said it. I just think people should aspire to more. You know, to better things. Why settle when the world has so much to offer? That's when I started to feel it, the invisible tape measure. Like he was sizing me up against a mental checklist, seeing if I fit. Not based on who I was, but what I had, what I wore, what I spent. And worse, he didn't even seem aware of it. He went on to say how people like us should only associate with others who understood taste and aesthetic integrity. That being with someone who didn't care about their image was like living with static. I was silent for a beat. People like us? I asked. He looked confused. Yeah, I mean you get it. You're smart, obviously. Articulate. You just need refinement. I blinked. Refinement, I repeated, the word dry in my mouth. He nodded as if he was helping me. I could feel myself shrinking in that chair. Not because I agreed with him, but because I realized how little he knew me, and how fast he'd decided who I should be. When the check came, he insisted on paying. I didn't argue. I just wanted to leave. As we stood outside, he leaned in and kissed my cheek. I flinched a little, and he didn't seem to notice. Or care. We should do this again, he said. Next time, I'll take you to this members-only rooftop bar. I think you'll love it. You have great potential, you know. I didn't respond. Just smiled, nodded, and backed away like the scene was ending. When I got home, I sat on my bed and stared at the wall for 20 minutes. It wasn't just that Theo was shallow. That would have been easy to dismiss. It was that he thought he was being deep. That his fixation on labels and status was some kind of philosophy, a way of life, and that anyone who didn't subscribe was aspiring to less. I texted my friend Joe. So, Theo was a walking credit card ad. Ugh, give me details. I gave her the play-by-play. She replied, "Girl, he tried to brand you." I laughed. She wasn't wrong. Theo texted me the next day. "Had a great time. You looked adorable. Let's elevate your wardrobe soon, face blowing a kiss." I never replied. He followed up twice, then disappeared. I didn't feel bad about ghosting him. I knew if I tried to explain, he wouldn't hear it. He'd think I was insecure or not ready for someone like him. But that experience stayed with me. Not because of Theo, but because of how easily someone can make you question your worth when they use the wrong metric. And now, whenever I meet someone new and they start talking about brands or lifestyle or aesthetic alignment, I feel that little warning bell ring. Because I don't need to be refined. I need to be respected. When I first moved to Seattle, I thought I was starting a new chapter. Fresh job, new city, my aunt's guest room, and a box of clothes I hadn't bothered to unpack for 2 weeks. I was 27, alone for the first time in years, and optimistic in that clueless way only someone post-breakup and pre-disillusionment can be. I thought Seattle would change everything. I thought I'd meet someone in a coffee shop or on a ferry or maybe at a farmer's market while we reached for the same overpriced loaf of sourdough. It didn't go that way. About a month after settling in, I downloaded the app. I wasn't looking for the one. Honestly, I just wanted someone to grab a drink with. Someone who wouldn't ask me why I was still crashing at my aunt's place or what had happened with my ex. I wanted connection, but not questions. That's when I met Jordan. Jordan was a lead singer in a band I'd actually heard of, a local group that played late-night sets in smoky bars and had an Instagram following large enough to be impressive without being embarrassing. He had the kind of confidence that made you feel lucky just to be in the same room. Tattoos on his arms, messy hair that looked intentional, and a voice like gravel over velvet. We met for drinks on a Thursday night, and I swear he didn't take his eyes off me for the first hour. I fell hard too fast. He made me feel interesting, and after a year of being in a relationship where I felt invisible, that alone was intoxicating. He smoked too much, drank like he was still 21, and his apartment looked like a set piece from a gritty indie movie. Clothes on the floor, ashtrays overflowing, beer bottles under the couch. I told myself it was charming, artistic, that he was just in his zone. A month into whatever we were calling it, I got lice. I woke up one morning, scratching at my scalp like a wild animal, and within 2 hours, I was sitting in a lice removal clinic surrounded by 7-year-olds watching cartoons while I tried not to cry. The technician was kind, but she kept giving me looks, the kind you give someone too old to be in a lice clinic. I had to call my aunt and tell her. She washed all the sheets and pillows without complaining, but I could feel the silent judgment every time she passed me in the hallway. I told Jordan. He said, "Damn, that sucks," and then vanished. Blocked me the next day. No explanation. No goodbye. Just gone. I never saw him again. Looking back, I wish I could say that was my low point. But dating has a funny way of letting you believe you've hit bottom, until you meet the next guy. There was the one who ghosted me after 3 dates, and when I asked why, said, "I didn't think you'd care." The one who invited me over for dinner and left another girl's tank top in his sheets. The one who told me he was emotionally available, then introduced me to his roommate, who was very clearly his girlfriend. And the one who said all the right things until I saw him holding hands with someone else at Pike Place Market, when he was supposedly on a solo trip to Oregon. Each time, I told myself I was learning, growing, toughening up. But really, I was just building walls and painting them to look like wisdom. I kept telling my friends I was fine, that I was just figuring things out. But I was lonely in a way that no playlist or wine glass or Sunday reset routine could fix. And then, when I'd just about sworn off dating altogether, I met James. He wasn't flashy. No band. No tattoos. No declarations of soulmate energy on the first date. He was just kind. He worked in the same building as me, different department, same elevator. We'd been exchanging polite nods and elevator jokes for weeks before he finally asked if I wanted to grab lunch. It wasn't a date, just a casual sandwich run. We talked about our favorite podcasts and how we both always order the exact same thing from the office cafeteria. I didn't think much of it, but he kept showing up, quietly, consistently. He asked how my meetings went, brought me tea when I had a sore throat, recommended a bookstore tucked behind a record shop that I now visit every month. When he finally asked me out on an actual date, I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I was scared. Scared of the cycle, of hope turning into disappointment, of vulnerability feeling like a setup. But I said yes, and something shifted. We didn't fall into bed right away. There was no dramatic, fireworks on the rooftop moment. We took it slow. We went to trivia nights and weekend markets. He met my aunt, brought her tulips, and asked about her favorite casserole recipe. We talked about our pasts, gently, without trying to impress or shock each other. I told him about Jordan, about the lice, about the way I kept choosing people who didn't choose me back. He didn't flinch. I get it, he said. We all have a version of that. A few months later, I moved into his tiny apartment with the peeling kitchen tiles and the squeaky faucet. We adopted a cat named Oliver who hated everyone except James. On Sunday mornings, we walked to the farmer's market, held hands, and bought whatever fruit looked the happiest. He made dinner most nights, real food, from scratch, with herbs he grew on the windowsill. I started sleeping better, laughing more. One night, we were sitting on the couch, halfway through a rewatch of some show we'd both pretend we weren't obsessed with, and he turned to me and said, "You make things feel easier." I didn't cry. Not then. But something cracked open in me in the softest, most healing way. Because it wasn't grand or dramatic. It was safe. It was real. It was earned. Now, when my friends tell me about their own dating horror stories, the ghosters, the gaslighters, the slow fades, I don't offer advice. I just listen. I nod. I say, yeah, I've been there. And when they ask if it gets better, I tell them the truth. Yes, but not in the way you think. It gets better when you stop chasing the fireworks and start noticing the steady warmth. When you stop mistaking chaos for chemistry. When you finally believe that love shouldn't make you anxious. All those bad dates? The heartbreaks, the tears, the moments that made me want to throw my phone into the ocean, they led me here. They taught me what not to settle for, what not to excuse, what not to lose myself in. I wouldn't relive them, but I don't regret them either, because they made me ready when the right one showed up. And now, on lazy Sunday mornings, with coffee brewing and Oliver purring at the foot of the bed, I think about how long it took to find this. How many times I almost gave up. How many times I told myself I wasn't built for love. But I was. I just had to grow into the version of myself that could receive it. And James? He was worth every cringy, confusing, exhausting step it took to get here. Even the lice. When I first moved to Seattle, I thought I was starting a new chapter. Fresh job, new city, my aunt's guest room, and a box of clothes I hadn't bothered to unpack for 2 weeks. I was 27, alone for the first time in years, and optimistic in that clueless way only someone post-breakup and pre-disillusionment can be. I thought Seattle would change everything. I thought I'd meet someone in a coffee shop or on a ferry or maybe at a farmer's market while we reached for the same overpriced loaf of sourdough. It didn't go that way. About a month after settling in, I downloaded the app. I wasn't looking for the one. Honestly, I just wanted someone to grab a drink with. Someone who wouldn't ask me why I was still crashing at my aunt's place or what had happened with my ex. I wanted connection, but not questions. That's when I met Jordan. Jordan was a lead singer in a band I'd actually heard of, a local group that played late-night sets in smoky bars and had an Instagram following large enough to be impressive without being embarrassing. He had the kind of confidence that made you feel lucky just to be in the same room. Tattoos on his arms, messy hair that looked intentional, and a voice like gravel over velvet. We met for drinks on a Thursday night, and I swear he didn't take his eyes off me for the first hour. I fell hard too fast. He made me feel interesting, and after a year of being in a relationship where I felt invisible, that alone was intoxicating. He smoked too much, drank like he was still 21, and his apartment looked like a set piece from a gritty indie movie. Clothes on the floor, ashtrays overflowing, beer bottles under the couch. I told myself it was charming, artistic, that he was just in his zone. A month into whatever we were calling it, I got lice. I woke up one morning, scratching at my scalp like a wild animal, and within 2 hours, I was sitting in a lice removal clinic surrounded by 7-year-olds watching cartoons while I tried not to cry. The technician was kind, but she kept giving me looks, the kind you give someone too old to be in a lice clinic. I had to call my aunt and tell her. She washed all the sheets and pillows without complaining, but I could feel the silent judgment every time she passed me in the hallway. I told Jordan. He said, "Damn, that sucks," and then vanished. Blocked me the next day. No explanation. No goodbye. Just gone. I never saw him again. Looking back, I wish I could say that was my low point. But dating has a funny way of letting you believe you've hit bottom, until you meet the next guy. There was the one who ghosted me after 3 dates, and when I asked why, said, "I didn't think you'd care." The one who invited me over for dinner and left another girl's tank top in his sheets. The one who told me he was emotionally available, then introduced me to his roommate, who was very clearly his girlfriend. And the one who said all the right things until I saw him holding hands with someone else at Pike Place Market, when he was supposedly on a solo trip to Oregon. Each time, I told myself I was learning, growing, toughening up. But really, I was just building walls and painting them to look like wisdom. I kept telling my friends I was fine, that I was just figuring things out, but I was lonely in a way that no playlist or wine glass or Sunday reset routine could fix. And then, when I'd just about sworn off dating altogether, I met James. He wasn't flashy. No band. No tattoos. No declarations of soulmate energy on the first date. He was just kind. He worked in the same building as me, different department, same elevator. We'd been exchanging polite nods and elevator jokes for weeks before he finally asked if I wanted to grab lunch. It wasn't a date, just a casual sandwich run. We talked about our favorite podcasts and how we both always order the exact same thing from the office cafeteria. I didn't think much of it, but he kept showing up, quietly, consistently. He asked how my meetings went, brought me tea when I had a sore throat, recommended a bookstore tucked behind a record shop that I now visit every month. When he finally asked me out on an actual date, I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I was scared. Scared of the cycle, of hope turning into disappointment, of vulnerability feeling like a setup. But I said yes, and something shifted. We didn't fall into bed right away. There was no dramatic, fireworks on the rooftop moment. We took it slow. We went to trivia nights and weekend markets. He met my aunt, brought her tulips, and asked about her favorite casserole recipe. We talked about our pasts, gently, without trying to impress or shock each other. I told him about Jordan, about the lice, about the way I kept choosing people who didn't choose me back. He didn't flinch. "I get it," he said. "We all have a version of that." A few months later, I moved into his tiny apartment with the peeling kitchen tiles and the squeaky faucet. We adopted a cat named Oliver who hated everyone except James. On Sunday mornings, we walked to the farmer's market, held hands, and bought whatever fruit looked the happiest. He made dinner most nights, real food, from scratch, with herbs he grew on the windowsill. I started sleeping better, laughing more. One night, we were sitting on the couch, halfway through a rewatch of some show we'd both pretend we weren't obsessed with, and he turned to me and said, "You make things feel easier." I didn't cry. Not then. But something cracked open in me in the softest, most healing way. Because it wasn't grand or dramatic. It was safe. It was real. It was earned. Now, when my friends tell me about their own dating horror stories, the ghosters, the gaslighters, the slow fades, I don't offer advice. I just listen. I nod. I say, yeah, I've been there. And when they ask if it gets better, I tell them the truth. Yes, but not in the way you think. It gets better when you stop chasing the fireworks and start noticing the steady warmth. When you stop mistaking chaos for chemistry. When you finally believe that love shouldn't make you anxious. All those bad dates? The heartbreaks, the tears, the moments that made me want to throw my phone into the ocean, they led me here. They taught me what not to settle for, what not to excuse, what not to lose myself in. I wouldn't relive them, but I don't regret them either, because they made me ready when the right one showed up. And now, on lazy Sunday mornings, with coffee brewing and Oliver purring at the foot of the bed, I think about how long it took to find this. How many times I almost gave up. How many times I told myself I wasn't built for love. But I was. I just had to grow into the version of myself that could receive it. And James? He was worth every cringy, confusing, exhausting step it took to get here. Even the lice. I met Mira on a dating app that markets itself as being for the emotionally intelligent. The irony. Her profile was soft, minimalist. A Polaroid of her with a sheepish grin, a blurry sunset, a bookshelf. Her bio simply read, "Be kind. Everything else is negotiable." We matched in a moment of quiet, the kind that slips in between errands and laundry, when you're too tired to swipe for lust, and instead look for something resembling stillness. Mira was warm. Not bubbly warm. She wrote in long, slow paragraphs. She used punctuation. She sent voice notes where she laughed at herself. Her texts felt like tiny letters. And she listened like really listened. When I mentioned my estranged sister, she didn't ask what happened. She asked what I missed about her. Our first date was at a thrift bookstore cafe. She showed up in linen pants and a worn navy sweater, holding a second-hand copy of letters to a young poet. "This is for you," she said, like it was no big deal. Inside the cover, she'd written, "Not a gift, just a trade. You'll owe me something beautiful later." I remember thinking, this is someone I want to disappoint as little as possible. We started seeing each other twice a week. Then 3. Then 5. She didn't demand time, she absorbed it. She didn't beg for attention. She made space that I wanted to fill. And every time I told her something vulnerable, about my mom's depression, my fear of becoming average, the way I clenched my jaw in my sleep, she'd just nod and say, "Thank you for trusting me." No advice. No judgment. Just presence. It was disarming. Addicting. But over time something shifted. Not in her words, in mine. I began censoring myself. Not big things, just small corners of personality. I'd avoid sarcasm, because it made her wince. I'd hide my frustration if she canceled plans last minute because she'd say, "I just needed a soft night." When I told her I had trouble sleeping, she showed up with a lavender pillow spray and whispered, "I'll protect your dreams." When I told her I was feeling behind in life, she said, "It's okay, not everyone blooms early." It was always framed as kindness. But it felt like being wrapped in silk and slowly suffocated. One night, after a bad day at work, I vented. Nothing extreme, just exhaustion, pressure, a short fuse with my manager. She tilted her head and said gently, "You don't usually bring sharp energy here. Are you okay?" It wasn't judgment, but it was a warning. I apologized. She smiled, but I knew something had been marked. The next time I made a joke about therapy, a harmless, self-aware thing, she went quiet for a beat, then whispered, "Sometimes I think you use humor to step away from your own sadness." I stared at her. "That's probably true." She kissed my forehead. "It's okay. I'll keep holding the sadness for you until you're ready." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking, what if I never asked her to hold it? What if she's not holding it, just hiding it from me? She was still gentle, still present, still so good. And somehow, that's what made it worse. Because I couldn't pinpoint why I felt more like a project than a person. Why I felt smaller every time I left her apartment. Why I was terrified to disappoint someone who had never even raised their voice. One day, I tried to pull back. Said I needed space. Not a breakup, just a pause. A chance to hear my own thoughts again. She nodded. Didn't ask why. Just said, "Of course. Take the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to be kind to yourself again." The words stung. Like she'd already written the narrative. I was the one hurting myself. She was just watching. In the weeks that followed, I expected her to reach out. She didn't. What I didn't expect was how many mutuals started texting me. Acquaintances, vague friends, people who knew her from yoga or writing circles. All with the same tone. "Hey, not trying to pry, but Myra's been so quiet lately." Said she was holding space for someone who ghosted her after opening up too fast. Or, "I know everyone processes differently, but she really cared about you. She just wanted someone soft, you know." None of it was loud. No accusations. No drama. Just seeds. Planted quietly. And I could feel the judgment start to wrap around me like vines. I messaged her once. Not out of anger, just to understand. "Why are you telling people I ghosted you?" We talked. I was honest. She replied, "I haven't said anything untrue. I told them I loved someone who got scared." I stared at the message for a long time. Technically she hadn't lied. But somehow, I was now the cautionary tale told in candlelit kitchens, the one who wasn't ready. The one who wasn't gentle enough. She's still in my orbit. We don't talk, but I hear about her. She's mentoring young poets, teaching meditation, hosting a book club called The Soft Resistance. She never calls me out by name. She doesn't have to, because Mira understood something people like me take years to learn. You don't need to raise your voice to control a room. You just have to be the kind one. The app said we were a 98% match. I remember staring at that number like it meant something, like it was a guarantee. Like the algorithm knew something about me I didn't. Maybe I wanted to believe it did. I was tired of bad dates, of short conversations that fizzled into silence, of effort that never led anywhere. So when I saw his profile, Colin 32, music lover, amateur cook looking for depth, I swiped right without hesitation. His photos were simple. One of him at a bookstore, one holding a dog I assumed wasn't his, he'd later confirm this apologetically, and one smiling with a coffee mug in his hand mid-laugh. It was an honest face, and I liked that he didn't look like he was trying too hard. No filtered selfies or shirtless gym pics. Just him. He messaged first, and the conversation took off right away. No weird small talk, no slow drip of hey, or what's up. He asked real questions. Wanted to know about the last book I read that actually moved me. We talked about childhood cartoons, best pizza toppings, and whether or not peanut butter belongs in smoothies. It does. I found myself checking my phone too often, smiling at texts, rereading his comments when I was supposed to be working. We moved to texting within 2 days. On the 4th day, he sent a photo of a dish he'd cooked, some kind of mushroom risotto, and joked that his dream was to impress someone with it. I told him I was a sucker for carbs and creamy sauces, and he replied, "Then we better plan that first date soon." We decided on drinks. A trendy wine bar downtown, walking distance from both our apartments. A Wednesday night. I wore a dark green dress, and put in just enough effort to feel good without looking like I was trying to prove something. I arrived a few minutes early, nerves fluttering just under the surface. First dates were always a weird mix of excitement and quiet dread. But Colin seemed promising. Easy. Safe. He arrived right on time. Tall, clean-cut, button-down shirt, soft brown eyes that crinkled at the edges when he smiled. He greeted me with a casual, warm hug, and we fell into conversation like we'd already met. And honestly, at first it was great. He was charming. Not slick or performative, just genuinely nice. We talked about our favorite concerts, how he once drove 4 hours to see a band play in a barn. I told him about my high school emo phase, and how it still haunts me when Spotify shuffles too deep. He laughed, not in a mocking way, but like he actually found it endearing. We ordered a bottle of wine, and time started slipping. The bar had that warm hum of low conversations and candlelight, and for a while, I let myself forget that we'd only just met. I liked him. I really liked him. Then, somewhere between glass 2 and 3, the vibe shifted. I didn't notice it right away, just a flicker of something underneath the surface. He leaned in closer. "So," he said, swirling his wine, "we're basically the same person." I laughed, assuming he was joking. "No, I'm serious," he said. "That match percentage? It's not wrong. I've never clicked with someone like this, not even close." I smiled politely. "Yeah, we definitely get along." He studied me for a moment. "What if this is it?" I blinked. "It? Like this? You and me? What if we don't need to go on any more dates after this?" It wasn't said in a creepy way. He was still smiling, still relaxed. But the weight of the statement felt heavier than it should have. I laughed again, trying to ease the tension. Let's survive this first date before planning a retirement together. He chuckled too, but his eyes stayed fixed on me. Later, as the bar started to empty out, he asked if I wanted to come back to his place. "Not for anything weird," he added quickly. "I just want to keep talking. Show you my vinyl collection." I hesitated. He noticed. "Totally your call," he said, raising both hands. "No pressure. I just really like being around you." Something about his tone was so sincere that I didn't know how to say no without feeling rude. So I said yes. We walked a few blocks through the quiet streets. His building was tucked between a bakery and an old tailor shop, 2nd floor, windows with string lights draped around them. Inside, it was cozy, a little messy but not gross. Books stacked on the floor. A dog bed in the corner. He explained that he dog-sat for his sister sometimes, hence the empty bed and the fur on the couch. He poured us both a little more wine and showed me his record collection, and I'll admit, it was impressive. A mix of old jazz, indie rock, 60s psych albums I'd only seen in thrift stores. He picked one, queued it up, and the room filled with warm, crackling guitar and soft vocals. We sat on the couch, side by side, and he talked about how music had gotten him through his worst year. He asked if I'd ever had a heartbreak so bad it changed me. I answered honestly. Told him about my ex, how I'd lost a little of myself in that relationship, and how I was still trying to get parts of me back. He looked at me like I was the only person in the world. And for a moment, it felt safe. But then his hand found my knee. And then it lingered. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded. It wasn't a bad kiss. It was warm and slow, the kind that made me briefly forget all my hesitation. But something about it felt too much. Like he wasn't just kissing me, he was attaching something to it. Meaning. Intensity. Expectation. When I pulled back gently, he brushed my hair behind my ear and said, "I don't want to date anyone else." I blinked. "We just met." "I know," he said, "but I don't need to see more. You're it for me." The room felt smaller. The music felt louder. My heart beat faster, not in a good way. I tried to laugh it off again. "You're getting ahead of yourself." He smiled. "Or maybe you're just not used to someone knowing what they want." There was that flicker of something. Entitlement, maybe. Or control dressed as confidence. "I think I should head out," I said, standing up slowly. He looked confused. "You don't have to." "I know. But I'm going to." He stood too, blocking my path for just a second too long before stepping aside. I gathered my things, and he walked me to the door. "I just thought we had something real," he said. "Maybe we do," I said. "But it's still early. Too early to define it." He nodded, but the disappointment in his face was sharp. As if I'd failed a test I didn't know I was taking. I walked home, sobered up quickly by the cool night air. My heels clicking on the pavement, echoing louder than I liked. The next morning, I woke up to a text. "Colin, hey, hope you got home okay. Last night felt really special. Let's talk later." I didn't respond right away. Later that day, another text. "Colin, I'm confused. Thought we had a great night. Did I do something wrong?" I still didn't answer. I needed space. Time to think. Then came a third. "Colin, wow. Ghosting me already? Unreal. You seem different." And just like that, the charm cracked. I blocked his number. Deleted the app. Sat on my couch and stared at the wall, wondering how I'd gotten it wrong again. I'd thought I was careful. I'd thought we were aligned. The app said we were a 98% match. I remember staring at that number like it meant something, like it was a guarantee. Like the algorithm knew something about me I didn't. Maybe I wanted to believe it did. I was tired of bad dates, of short conversations that fizzled into silence, of effort that never led anywhere. So when I saw his profile, Colin 32, music lover, amateur cook looking for depth, I swiped right without hesitation. His photos were simple. One of him at a bookstore, one holding a dog I assumed wasn't his, he'd later confirm this apologetically, and one smiling with a coffee mug in his hand mid-laugh. It was an honest face, and I liked that he didn't look like he was trying too hard. No filtered selfies or shirtless gym pics. Just him. He messaged first, and the conversation took off right away. No weird small talk, no slow drip of hey or what's up. He asked real questions. Wanted to know about the last book I read that actually moved me. We talked about childhood cartoons, best pizza toppings, and whether or not peanut butter belongs in smoothies. It does. I found myself checking my phone too often, smiling at texts, rereading his comments when I was supposed to be working. We moved to texting within 2 days. On the 4th day, he sent a photo of a dish he'd cooked, some kind of mushroom risotto, and joked that his dream was to impress someone with it. I told him I was a sucker for carbs and creamy sauces, and he replied, "Then we better plan that first date soon." We decided on drinks. A trendy wine bar downtown, walking distance from both our apartments. A Wednesday night. I wore a dark green dress, and put in just enough effort to feel good without looking like I was trying to prove something. I arrived a few minutes early, nerves fluttering just under the surface. First dates were always a weird mix of excitement and quiet dread. But Colin seemed promising. Easy. Safe. He arrived right on time. Tall, clean-cut, button-down shirt, soft brown eyes that crinkled at the edges when he smiled. He greeted me with a casual, warm hug, and we fell into conversation like we'd already met. And honestly, at first it was great. He was charming. Not slick or performative, just genuinely nice. We talked about our favorite concerts, how he once drove 4 hours to see a band play in a barn. I told him about my high school emo phase, and how it still haunts me when Spotify shuffles too deep. He laughed, not in a mocking way, but like he actually found it endearing. We ordered a bottle of wine, and time started slipping. The bar had that warm hum of low conversations and candlelight, and for a while, I let myself forget that we'd only just met. I liked him. I really liked him. Then, somewhere between glass 2 and 3, the vibe shifted. I didn't notice it right away, just a flicker of something underneath the surface. He leaned in closer. "So," he said, swirling his wine, "we're basically the same person." I laughed, assuming he was joking. "No, I'm serious," he said. "That match percentage? It's not wrong. I've never clicked with someone like this, not even close." I smiled politely. "Yeah, we definitely get along." He studied me for a moment. "What if this is it?" I blinked. "It? Like this? You and me. What if we don't need to go on any more dates after this?" It wasn't said in a creepy way. He was still smiling, still relaxed. But the weight of the statement felt heavier than it should have. I laughed again, trying to ease the tension. "Let's survive this first date before planning a retirement together." He chuckled too, but his eyes stayed fixed on me. Later, as the bar started to empty out, he asked if I wanted to come back to his place. "Not for anything weird," he added quickly. "I just want to keep talking. Show you my vinyl collection." I hesitated. He noticed. "Totally your call," he said, raising both hands. "No pressure. I just really like being around you." Something about his tone was so sincere that I didn't know how to say no without feeling rude. So I said yes. We walked a few blocks through the quiet streets. His building was tucked between a bakery and an old tailor shop, second floor, windows with string lights draped around them. Inside, it was cozy, a little messy but not gross. Books stacked on the floor. A dog bed in the corner. He explained that he dog-sat for his sister sometimes, hence the empty bed and the fur on the couch. He poured us both a little more wine and showed me his record collection, and I'll admit, it was impressive. A mix of old jazz, indie rock, 60s psych albums I'd only seen in thrift stores. He picked one, queued it up, and the room filled with warm, crackling guitar and soft vocals. We sat on the couch, side by side, and he talked about how music had gotten him through his worst year. He asked if I'd ever had a heartbreak so bad it changed me. I answered honestly. Told him about my ex, how I'd lost a little of myself in that relationship, and how I was still trying to get parts of me back. He looked at me like I was the only person in the world. And for a moment, it felt safe. But then his hand found my knee. And then it lingered. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded. It wasn't a bad kiss. It was warm and slow, the kind that made me briefly forget all my hesitation. But something about it felt too much. Like he wasn't just kissing me, he was attaching something to it. Meaning. Intensity. Expectation. When I pulled back gently, he brushed my hair behind my ear and said, "I don't want to date anyone else." I blinked. "We just met." "I know," he said, "but I don't need to see more. You're it for me." The room felt smaller. The music felt louder. My heart beat faster, not in a good way. I tried to laugh it off again. "You're getting ahead of yourself." He smiled. "Or maybe you're just not used to someone knowing what they want." There was that flicker of something. Entitlement, maybe. Or control dressed as confidence. "I think I should head out," I said, standing up slowly. He looked confused. "You don't have to." "I know. But I'm going to." He stood too, blocking my path for just a second too long before stepping aside. I gathered my things, and he walked me to the door. "I just thought we had something real," he said. "Maybe we do," I said. "But it's still early. Too early to define it." He nodded, but the disappointment in his face was sharp. As if I'd failed a test I didn't know I was taking. I walked home, sobered up quickly by the cool night air. My heels clicking on the pavement, echoing louder than I liked. The next morning, I woke up to a text. "Colin, hey, hope you got home okay. Last night felt really special. Let's talk later." I didn't respond right away. Later that day, another text. "Colin, I'm confused. Thought we had a great night. Did I do something wrong?" I still didn't answer. I needed space. Time to think. Then came a third. "Colin, wow. Ghosting me already? Unreal. You seem different." And just like that, the charm cracked. I blocked his number. Deleted the app. Sat on my couch and stared at the wall, wondering how I'd gotten it wrong again. I'd thought I was careful. I'd thought we were aligned. I matched with Serena on a quiet Thursday night, half out of boredom, half out of restlessness. I wasn't in the mood for anything serious, but my week had been a blur of spreadsheets, meal prep leftovers, and late-night YouTube spirals, and I figured I could at least manage a drink with someone who could hold a decent conversation. Her bio read, healer, empath, plant mom. Let's talk energy, not resumes. It was quirky, sure. I swiped right without really thinking about it. She messaged me first. "Your energy seems peaceful," she wrote. "I could use a bit of that in my life." I stared at the message for a few seconds, unsure how to respond. Was this a line? A weird opener? Or just her way of saying hello? I replied with something simple. "Peaceful's not a bad thing to be. What's your energy like?" She sent back a long reply about alignment, how she'd just come back from a sound bath meditation and felt newly grounded. I couldn't tell if she was being sincere or just eccentric. Still, the conversation kept going. We made plans to meet the following Sunday for coffee. I suggested a busy cafe near the main park in town, somewhere bright and public. Something told me that a quiet, candlelit bar wasn't the right vibe for this one. She agreed, said she liked places with natural light and plant walls. I wasn't entirely sure what a plant wall was, but I assumed the cafe qualified. I got there first. It was one of those sunny, annoyingly perfect spring afternoons where everything looks extra clean and golden. I grabbed a table near the front window and ordered a black coffee. The place smelled like cinnamon and ground espresso, and for a second, I thought maybe this was going to be fine. A weird date, sure, but fine. She walked in 5 minutes later. Serena looked exactly like her photos, if not more intense in person. She wore a long linen dress in a faded sage color, with layered necklaces, several rings, and no shoes. I'm not kidding. She was barefoot in a public cafe. Her toenails were painted a chipped maroon color, and a small tattoo of a crescent moon peeked out from her ankle. She floated over to me with a smile and opened her arms like we were old friends. I stood up awkwardly and went in for a half hug, which she turned into a full-bodied, two-handed squeeze. "You have a calming presence," she said into my ear as we hugged. "Like moss after rain." I blinked. "Thanks. You, smell like sandalwood." She smiled wider and took the seat across from me. Her eyes didn't leave mine for a full minute. "I could tell from your messages. You're carrying a wound." I chuckled nervously. "A wound? In your heart," she said. "Not fresh, but not healed either." I opened my mouth to say something, maybe a joke, maybe a question, but she closed her eyes and lifted both hands, palms up, as if she were listening to something I couldn't hear. "You don't need to speak," she murmured. "Your aura says everything." Now, I've had some strange dates. A woman once asked me within 10 minutes if I wanted to have kids someday. Another quizzed me on Marvel trivia for 20 minutes, and then ghosted me for not knowing the name of Iron Man's AI assistant in the comics. But this was new territory. Serena kept her eyes closed for another full minute, and I sat there, sipping my coffee, unsure if I should say something or just wait for the seance to conclude. When she opened her eyes again, they were glossy. "You were hurt by someone who didn't see your light," she said softly. "That pain lingers. But there's beauty in that. You've turned your ache into softness." I nodded slowly. "That's very poetic of you." She tilted her head, studying me. "You don't believe me." I shrugged. "I believe you believe it." She laughed, a high, tinkling sound. "That's fair," she said. "But you will." Then she launched into a story about her ex-boyfriend, a man named Micah who, according to her, had shattered her third eye with his toxicity. "He thought I was crazy," she said, "just because I could sense the emotions of people walking past us on the street. He didn't understand my gift." I tried to nod sympathetically. "That must have been hard." "It was a spiritual assault," she said solemnly. "But I've reclaimed my energy since then. I did a shadow work retreat last fall in the desert. It cracked me open in the best way. I was halfway through my coffee and starting to eye the exit sign. The sun was still bright outside, and I briefly fantasized about walking out, grabbing a taco from the food truck across the street, and pretending this date never happened. Then she reached across the table and gently placed her fingers on my wrist. "You're safe with me," she said. "I can feel how guarded you are. You don't need to be." I gave her a tight smile and pulled my hand back under the guise of adjusting my cup. She sighed, still resisting. "I'm just not used to being read like a horoscope," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "That's because most people don't see you," she replied. "They see your surface. I see your soul." I chuckled, then immediately regretted it. Her face fell. "You think I'm making this up," she said quietly. No, I said, trying to backpedal. "It's just a lot for a first date." She blinked. And then, without warning, tears began to well in her eyes. "It always happens like this," she whispered. "People say they want real. Then they run from it." I panicked. The tears were real, and they were coming fast. She wasn't wailing, but her face crumpled in that childlike way that hits you somewhere deep and uncomfortable. I sat frozen as she sniffled, dabbed her eyes with her sleeve, and shook her head. "I'm sorry," she said. "It's just, you remind me of him." "Micah?" I asked, not knowing what else to say. "No. Josh." I didn't know who Josh was, but she was already explaining. Josh, it turned out, was the real love of her life. A poet she met at a workshop in Santa Fe. He had a laugh like rain and hands that trembled when he talked about his childhood. They fell in love under moonlight and lavender incense. He left her for a girl named Brooke who worked in real estate. She had zero emotional range, Serena sobbed. But she had a nicer car. I tried to offer her a napkin, but she waved it away. "I'm fine," she said, wiping her eyes with the heel of her palm. "I just feel everything. Deeply. I'm an empath. It's both a gift and a burden." People around us were starting to glance over. I felt their eyes flicking to the table, where I sat with a crying barefoot woman who was now talking about auras, karma, and how the universe had clearly brought us together to heal old wounds. I wanted to disappear. When she finally calmed down, I suggested we call it a day. "I have some errands to run," I lied. "But this was really something." She nodded slowly. "I understand. You're overwhelmed." "Something like that," I said. She stood and hugged me again, another full, pressing hug, like we were saying goodbye forever. She looked at me with a softness that almost made me feel bad. "Don't be afraid to feel," she said. "Even if you don't understand it yet." I promised her I'd try. She walked away barefoot, her linen dress fluttering behind her like a curtain in the breeze. I sat back down and finished my coffee in silence. Later that evening, I received a poem in my inbox. It was called "To the Boy with Quiet Sadness in His Bones." It was 10 stanzas long and included references to moss, starlight, and something called a violet wound. I didn't reply. I used to believe that loneliness was the worst feeling in the world. That's why I downloaded the app. Not for love, not for lust, not for games. I just didn't want to eat dinner alone again. Didn't want another Friday evening to echo in an empty apartment. I craved the warmth of a message, the spark of attention, the fantasy of connection. When I matched with Holly, it felt like a small mercy. She had a kind smile in her photos, the sort that made you want to lean in and tell her secrets. Her bio was a mix of sarcasm and sincerity, bookworm, brunch addict, aspiring poet. She used an Oxford comma and properly punctuated her messages. I noticed these things. I always noticed the small things. Our chats were light at first, music, weekend plans, best pizza in the city. But there was an immediacy to her replies, like she was always waiting for me to type back. That felt flattering, intoxicating even. After a few days, she started sending voice notes. Her voice was soft, low, a little breathless, like she'd just woken up and wanted me to be the first person she spoke to. It didn't take long before she asked to meet in person. We agreed on a little Italian restaurant tucked between a bookstore and a florist downtown. I arrived first and waited outside, watching the late summer sky melt into dusk. She walked up in a pale blue dress, her hair in loose waves, smiling like she'd known me forever. "Hi," she said. Simple. Sweet. And so it began. Dinner was charming. She asked questions about my family, my job, my writing. I'd mentioned in passing that I journal sometimes. She laughed too hard at my jokes, leaned forward too far across the table, but I chalked it up to enthusiasm. To nerves. It wasn't anything I hadn't seen before. Afterward, we walked through the nearby park, the air still thick with August humidity. At one point, she reached for my hand. I hesitated but held it. When we parted that night, she hugged me tightly. "Let's not wait too long for the next one," she whispered. The messages started pouring in the next morning. "Good morning, sunshine sun. Still thinking about you last night. Can I see you again today?" I smiled at first, replied with kind enthusiasm. But something about the tempo of her attention began to feel off. It was relentless. Morning, afternoon, late at night. If I took more than an hour to respond, she'd follow up with, "Are you okay? Or did I do something wrong?" I tried to slow things down gently. Said I was busy with work, that I needed a little space. She replied, "I just feel so close to you already. It's like I've known you forever." We'd met once. I began responding less. Her messages grew longer, more intense, confessional. She told me she hadn't felt this kind of connection in years, that she dreamed about me, that she saw a future, that it hurt when I didn't reply right away. I started feeling guilty. but also claustrophobic. I told her we needed to take a step back, that I wasn't in a place to dive headfirst into something so intense. She said she understood, but she didn't stop. The first time she showed up uninvited, it was outside my office. I was stepping out for lunch, and there she was, standing across the street, holding a coffee. "I figured you'd want one," she said with a grin. "You said you liked hazelnut, right?" I felt a chill despite the heat. I hadn't told her where I worked. "How did you know where I'd be?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "You mentioned it once," she shrugged. "And I just connected the dots. I wanted to surprise you." She looked so proud, so sure she was doing something romantic. I took the coffee, thanked her, and made an excuse to get back to work. She texted later that day. "Did I weird you out?" "I didn't mean to. I just missed you." I didn't reply. The second time was worse. I was at the gym, my regular Thursday night routine. As I walked out to my car, I saw her waiting beside it. This time she was crying. "I thought you blocked me," she said through tears. "Why are you pulling away?" "I thought we had something real." I stood there in the parking lot, keys in hand, trying to breathe. "Holly," I said slowly, "I'm asking you to stop showing up like this. It's not okay." She looked stunned, then devastated, then furious. "Wow," she snapped. "So that's it? I let myself care, and now I'm crazy." "I never said that," I replied, exhausted. "But this isn't healthy." She stormed off. That night, I blocked her number. But blocking didn't stop her. She started using other numbers. Fake emails. Instagram burner accounts. You can't ignore fate. "I forgive you. Just talk to me. You can't pretend I didn't happen." Each time I'd report, block, and try to push it away. But I began to feel like a prisoner in my own life. I'd check the peephole before leaving my apartment. Double-lock my doors. I installed a camera above my door and kept the blinds drawn. Then came the night she broke in. I came home to find my bookshelf toppled, a framed photo shattered on the floor, and a note on my kitchen counter. "You're still in denial. But I know what we are." I collapsed into a chair, heart racing. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just stared at the note for a long time, hands trembling, bile rising in my throat. I called the police. Filed a report. Changed my locks. Filed for a restraining order. But nothing felt like enough. I started sleeping with a bat beside my bed. Every noise in the night sent my pulse spiking. I couldn't focus at work. I couldn't relax in my own home. Eventually I left. Not forever. But I packed 2 suitcases and flew to stay with my brother 3 states away. I told him everything. He listened quietly, then made me a sandwich and told me I could stay as long as I needed. The nightmares came less frequently, but they still came. I'd wake up sweating, convinced she was at the window. I'd open my phone out of habit and expect to see a message from a new number. But slowly, the silence became comforting. Slowly, I started to trust it. It's been over a year since I last heard from Holly. I never saw her again after the break-in. Maybe the restraining order scared her off. Maybe she found someone else to latch onto. Or maybe she realized I wasn't going to play along anymore. Sometimes I wonder if she truly believed we were in love. Other times, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't pulled away when I did. When people talk about stalking, they picture obsession from a stranger. But this wasn't a stranger. This was someone who smiled at me over pasta, who quoted poetry and talked about bookstores and said I had a gentle soul. This was someone who made me feel special, until I said no. There's a line between vulnerability and danger. I didn't know I was crossing it when I agreed to that first date. I didn't know I was opening a door I'd later have to bolt shut. But I've learned that kindness isn't always a shield. That some people will see empathy as an opening. That silence, in the face of red flags, becomes complicity. I'm still open to love. But now I know to listen when my gut tenses, when the flattery feels too heavy, when the pace feels too fast. I know that attention is not affection. That persistence is not passion.